Hey guys, it's Tracy. Welcome back to my channel. So today I just wanted to do something a little different. Instead of talking about books today, I actually wanted to discuss reading experiences, reading choices that we make, and how they're shaped or reshaped by your own personal experiences, the in real life encounters that you have. I've thought about doing this video for quite a while now, purely because I had this realization, and I don't know why it hasn't caught on to me until now, but in the last 12 months I would say the books that I've sought out, my judgment of books and my overall reading experience has very much changed, like noticeably. At first it was a bit alarming, we'll get into that, but now I feel like I've gained a different perspective, a different appreciation even, as well as a way of recognizing between being objective and being subjective when I'm judging books. So this is what the premise of today's video is going to be. I also feel like this is quite relevant to the current climate with the US protests as well as the Black Lives Matter movement, because I do think that with the discussions around educating ourselves and actively trying to search for resources, that definitely has moved people into a different mind frame when it comes to what we're consuming on a daily basis, whether it be through books, TV shows, podcasts, etc. I feel like I'm not the only person with this kind of feeling, but since high school up until now, my reading choices, the way that I feel about books has definitely changed immensely. I can say that there are some books that have stayed with me from when I was, say, in year 7, which was 13 years old, up until now. I'm 25, so that's 12 years, but they haven't stayed for the same reasons. And that definitely comes down to, education, to the different life experiences that I've gone through, what I know more about, the exposure to everything around me beyond just the small world that I would have been in when I was 13. My mum called me and now I've lost my train of thought. So for instance, there's a book called Call Me By Your Name, which I'm fairly sure that a lot of people know about because it is a very popular book as well as a film now. It is centered around LGBTQ plus relationship, and when I read it, which was when I was 13, I read it in a time where I was attending a Christian school where the ideas of gender and sexuality was never openly discussed, nor was it welcomed. We just had the one definition, and anyone who had identified beyond that definition was not considered to be normal. At least that's what it was like when I was studying at the school. So when I was reading this book, I felt a sense of taboo, like I was reading something that I shouldn't be reading. So I quickly finished it and forgot about it. I didn't attain or retain any of the messages that the author was trying to present to the reader. As opposed to me now, if I reread it, that's definitely not the feeling that I would feel now, and I would be able to appreciate exactly what the story is trying to present, and I'm glad that it's been celebrated as much as it has. I mean, the book has been out for quite a while now. The fact that I read it 13 years ago, so it's great to see. I just wish that I had read it a bit later on in life as opposed to when I was a lot younger. Another one would be Mallory Blackman's Noughts and Crosses. So this one here I've loved ever since I was in high school, but when I was reading in high school I loved it for the romance and the love story. Instead of Mallory Blackman's attempt to explore racism, discrimination, class differences, that's not the thing that I took out of it at the time. I was very caught up with the relationship between Callum and Steffi, and how, to me, it was so great to read about this epic love story. And recently when I reread it, that was definitely not the feeling anymore. I was a lot more engrossed, I would say, or engaged by the themes that were presented in this as opposed to the love story, because by then I would have experienced, the range of emotions that comes with relationships, with liking someone. So I wasn't really caught up with a love story per se, which is why I don't read a lot of romances as well these days. But I definitely appreciated what Mallory Blackman was trying to present to her readers in terms of discussing all of these issues that we need to be talking about. So yes, being educated and having knowledge can really dictate how you perceive a book. You know, age does come with this in terms of understanding more mature content, I would have to say, but we're so open these days about discussing sexuality, you know, gender norms, racism, discrimination, that I would say if I was to read this now at the age of 13, I may not just take away from the book a love story. I don't think my choices of reading between years 7 to 10 was particularly confined to a genre. I didn't really know that YA existed until I found BookTube. In saying that, I still read, you know, Twilight, Vampire Academy, like The City of Glass, all of those books that were very, very well known. At the same time, I still read adult fiction and whatnot, but to a very bare minimum. Up until I got to around year 11 and 12 and I was studying English literature, my reading choices or my understanding of being a reader changed, and it was influenced by the books that I was reading and what I thought made you a reader. So to illustrate this, these were the books that I read during high school when I was studying like year 10, year 11 and 12, and there were classics. So you've got Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and then you also had adult fiction which was more like novels, so This Boy's Life by Tobias Wolff, as well as any Tim Winton book really. I read Cloud Street after I studied one of his books in high school. What I'm trying to say is, at the time I thought that being a reader meant I had to read one of these genres. I had to read a classic. I had to really learn to love books that, you know, have existed for centuries now. I had to only read adult fiction, in particular fiction novels that explored a wide range of themes, because that would make me appear, you know, sophisticated or educated or knowledgeable. You know, if I wasn't able to discuss Breakfast at Tiffany's or The Great Gatsby or any of George Orwell's books, I wasn't a reader. I would have to say it was a very demeaning way of thinking about readers and disregarding all the other genres that are out there that I've come to love now, but at the time I just felt like I couldn't read. What it did at the time was made me read a lot of adult fiction, crime, mystery, historical fiction, which I still love now, but it was really the only thing that I read at the time, and I was telling myself that, yep, I 100% understand exactly what the authors are conveying, which isn't true, because most of the emotions or the events that were presented in those books I wouldn't have experienced at the age of, what, 17, 18. It would be the case where if I were to reread those books now, there are things that I would 100% pick up better than I would have then, and that would have been due to my lack of maturity or lack of life experiences, even just general knowledge really. So yeah, that was me right before I found BookTube, and that was when I was exposed to the world of YA, that there was a whole genre out there that was dedicated to this age group but could still entertain so many other people reading it, and I fell in love to the point where I felt like BookTube was really dictating what I was reading. And at the time I loved it. I loved that I, you know, was reading all this hyped book, that I was on the BookTube train. I was consuming all of these books that was being recommended to me without realizing that at one point I had read over 100 books in a year and not really remembered any of the books that I was reading, which is a shame, because as much as that number is, wow, that's amazing, what am I reading for? Am I reading just because I'm reading? Am I reading to be part of a trend? I put a lot of pressure on myself by partaking in all the hype around all of these new books. You know, I had shelves full of books that I hadn't touched or tried to read or didn't like, but I purchased it anyway to be a part of the community. So between 2015 to even last year, I barely read anything, which was saddening to me, but at the same time, the books that I read, I tried to be very intentional about. So this was a shift in my reading choices. I read because I wanted to gain something out of the books that I read, to see if it could add anything to my life and, you know, my thoughts. You know, the biggest things that I look for in a book now is how thought-provoking and how engaging it is. I can like it for its entertainment value, but what am I going to remember from that book? It's something that I'm working on. I can definitely say that most of the books I read in the last 5 years tick that box, which makes me super happy. And it hasn't really changed my genre preference. I still read a wide range of genres, but I've come to develop a very mindful way of picking out or selecting a book to read. In saying that, I am reading The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes because I just had to. Yeah. And then I would say in the last 12 months, beyond just being mindful of book selection, I experienced a rather personal trauma by losing a loved one and having to deal with grief, which I've done a video about, so you can find that on my channel if you wish to watch that. And having such a traumatic experience happen in your life can open up, or which it has personally for me, open up a new realm or a new theme to read about, which I never purposely tried to find before. So these are the books that I have purchased, I would say in the last 6 months, that really cover the topics on death, grief, you know, adjusting to a new life without someone that you love that is no longer there. I've read some of these, they're YA, they're non-fiction, and this one's adult fiction. And to me at first it was a way of trying to find relatable content so that I could help myself process through my feelings, so that I could feel like I wasn't the only one going through this. Also wanting to see how grief was presented. I mean, now I understand that grief isn't the same for everyone, and these books really show this as well, they really convey that. But I couldn't help feeling like some of the books that I read discussed really trivial things compared to what I had gone through. I started judging the contents of books a lot and very harshly. You know, there were scenes that I would read and I felt nothing. It couldn't evoke an emotion out of me, and because of that I casted it aside, or I simply thought it was bad. But it was more because I was only feeling one type of emotion and I couldn't tap into the other emotions. So in the recent maybe 2 or 3 months, I started to realize that I was being very, very subjective about a book, which is fine. Like, a lot of people read and they will judge based on their own emotions and whatnot. But when I'm presenting a review or trying to speak about a book, sometimes it's better to be objective about it, because not everyone will have the same experiences that I have or have gone through, or have the same feelings from an experience that I've gone through. I hope I'm making sense at this point. But yes, a lot of the reading experiences that I had in the last 12 months weren't very enjoyable to me. In fact, I felt like some of the reading that I did was a drag purely because of my mindset. I mean, I don't blame myself for it in particular. It was like, it just had to, it was bound to happen regardless. But that's definitely changed my perspective of reading. So I read these books purely to understand about grief more and to find relatable content. Now when I read books that do discuss, you know, death and understanding the process of grief, I don't judge it as much. If anything, I feel like those books do evoke more of an emotion out of me. You know, I've never been a huge crier, but now when I read those, they really do touch me, and I find that I can connect more, which I really like, because it's opened up something in me where I've identified that I can connect with this content now, which I wouldn't have been able to beforehand. So for instance, I haven't reread The Book Thief yet, but I know that when I do, my entire reading experience and what I think about it will be very different to how I felt before last year. So yeah, I do think that your personal experiences can really push you towards a direction or a choice of reading that you would never have thought of. Like I said, with the current protests and the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of people may not, including myself, have thought to read non-fictional books that can educate ourselves on, you know, Black history. For myself, like I said, I really love historical fiction, but I just love the dramatization element, the entertainment value, whilst also kinda understanding the historical events. Obviously, I understand that not all of it will be factually correct, but at least I'm getting a broader idea of it. Now with me wanting to educate myself more to understand, because I don't understand, right? I have sought out non-fiction books that are related to Black history, and I am trying to read through them. They actually reminded me of how I have been deliberately avoiding a lot of historical recounts on the Vietnam War. So I was born in Australia, but my parents are born in Vietnam. My dad arrived in Australia as a refugee due to the war. But I actively avoided reading or seeking out information because I didn't want to read about what my parents had gone through or what my dad and his family had gone through. Now I definitely do, because being ignorant or, you know, not knowing, I think is worse than actually knowing, because I should know that my dad would have gone through some trauma back then and he hasn't spoken about it. So if I educate myself, then maybe I can kind of understand what it is and what happened. We don't talk about it at home either. So yeah, that was just a thought that I had. I can't say that my reading choices or how I read or the books that I choose to read have matured. It's just adapted to my own personal views and values. What I find enjoyable, definitely, but also what I'm seeking for in my own life, how I add value to it, and books that I can feel like I emotionally connect with, which again I draw from my own personal encounters. So yeah, I definitely think that everyone has a different journey when it comes to reading. I feel like readers particularly will understand what I mean when I say journey. Not just a hobby to me or something you do to pass time. Honestly, sometimes I just think it's a roller coaster ride. You might not expect what you are about to head into. You might come out of it loving it, might not. As someone who loves reading, I'm super passionate about books and what it can give to us and the connections that we build. So that's kind of what I mean about journey. I would love to know how your reading experiences have changed, you know, what books you do and don't read, genre wise and whatnot. I hope you didn't mind listening to me ramble about my self-realization. I've definitely read more books this year than I have previously, due to time, but also my rediscovery of why I like reading, not putting that pressure on me, and finding the books that I like to read. If you can, please take the time to look at the description box for links to the Black Lives Matter movement, how we can support both here as well as in the US. You know, it's not a trend that we jump on and then jump off once the conversation around it quietens down. It's something that needs to continue to progress. So yeah, I hope you guys have a lovely day and I shall see you guys next time. Bye.